Welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering women through storytelling and education. And April is C-Section Awareness Month. It was started by the ICAN movement, and we're going to be talking with Tatiana today, who is one of the directors with ICAN that just is such an amazing resource for women who have had C-sections and also who want to have Vbacs. And there's a lot of education and information on there. So she's going to be on this episode to share with us her story, how she got involved in the program, and to tell us all about ICAN. Before we dive into the episode, make sure that you are following us on Instagram, join our Miraculous Mamas Facebook group, and to leave a review and tell me what episode you have loved and why. Also, don't forget to reach out and let me know what you guys want to hear next. Who do you want to hear from? What topics do you want to be discussed? Reach out to me and let me know. All right, we're going to go ahead and dive into this interview.
All right, everyone. I have Tatiana Dudziak. I hope I pronounced the last name right on here. She's a director with ICAN, and they empower women and educate them on Vbac. And I'm super excited to talk to her because April is C-Section Awareness Month. And so I wanted to definitely have an episode dedicated talking about it because 1 in 3 babies is born via cesarean in the United States. So it's definitely a huge part of a lot of people's birth stories. So I'm super excited to talk to you. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm so excited to, bring more awareness around C-sections and ICAN and what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to kind of start with your story and then kind of go into what is ICAN and how did you become one of the directors there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my story is I'm a 2-time C-section mom with my oldest, who is 2. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So very hectic. With my oldest, I was living overseas at the time. I was living in Poland, and I'm American. I'm from the U.S., and my husband and I were living over there at the time, and I had planned a home birth, and I ended up having a cesarean, and it was very traumatic, and it was basically the last thing that I expected to happen to me. I was like one of those people that read all the books and the natural birth articles, and I did all the research that I thought was necessary, and I was like, nobody's gonna tell me that they're not gonna use any interventions on me, and I thought that I was prepared for any situation. And basically what happened was my water broke and there was meconium. And in Poland, the home birth midwives don't have hospital privileges. So basically the meconium being present in the water ruled me out of having a home birth. So I had to go to the hospital, and I never even visited the hospital. Really, it was something that I just didn't expect. So I went to the hospital and ended up, they wanted to do a C-section right away due to my baby's size. And my husband and I fought really, really hard to have me labor, which they eventually agreed to. So they let me labor for basically, we got there in the morning. They basically let me labor for the rest of the day. I, didn't progress enough. So I did end up having a cesarean early the next morning. A couple things just with that situation was that I was basically strapped to a bed the whole time. and on my back, and I was unable to move. I was not able to get out of the bed. Like I would get out of the bed to like go to the bathroom, and that was it. And they'd be like, you got to get back in the bed, so there was no like wireless monitoring or anything like that. So I think that definitely contributed to, me being not progressing enough. So having my first C-section was just very traumatic. I had a lot of issues after the fact with feeding my son, and that contributed to a lot of postpartum PTSD that I experienced. So basically right after having my first, I knew that I wanted to have a Vbac. I knew what a Vbac was, and I knew that I just needed to find the right provider to help me do that. So fast forward when I got pregnant with my second, my husband and I were back living in the U.S. So I was able to find a Vbac supportive provider, and which is sometimes no easy feat to do. And basically I went into labor on Christmas Day, unfortunately. And I knew from pretty much the moment I called my midwife and told her I was in labor that it was not going to go my way, because she was not happy that she had to leave her Christmas dinner with her family. So, I basically got to the hospital. I had really, really intense, like double wave contractions. My doula got there, and it was just, I don't know, it was just, I think I just knew that it wasn't going to happen, and I had this kind of like mental block against it almost. There was one point where my midwife came in and she sat down and she basically just said to me point blank, I don't think you're going to have a Vbac. And that was really the end for me. I would just succumbed to having another C-section. They kind of told me that my son was in distress a little bit. They told me that he was having these subtle decelerations in his heart rate. It was never made to be like a big deal to me. They were always like, oh, it's a little bit, but it's fine. And then, all of a sudden that was like a big deal. So still to this day, I don't really know if that was the cause. I was only about 3 centimeters dilated when I went in for the C-section. So I had what is called a CBAC, which is a term coined by ICAN, which means that, I wanted to have a Vbac, and I ended up in another cesarean. So after my second cesarean is when I really wanted to start getting involved with ICAN. I had joined ICAN after my first cesarean as just a member, through social media and joining their Facebook groups and everything. And then after my second cesarean is when I really wanted to get involved in the cause and bring awareness to this, because it's something that is really near and dear to my heart. And I've also, I've had a lot of friends that have had cesareans, and, it's something that I think is getting more conversation nowadays, which is great. So I became involved as a volunteer with ICAN really last summer. So almost about a year now I've been with them.
Yeah, that's awesome that there's an organization like that to help spread awareness.
Finances can be a very touchy subject, and when you have earned your money, you deserve to keep it. And so I want to tell you about Chime. It is an award-winning app and debit card with no hidden fees or monthly minimums. They have fee-free overdraft on up to $100 in debit purchases with SpotMe. It's like overdraft protection, but way better. You get your paychecks, benefits, stimulus checks, and tax return up to 2 days earlier with direct deposit. No hidden fees or monthly minimums, plus 38,000 fee-free ATMs with MoneyPass and Visa plus Alliance. Security is a big thing with finances, and you can turn on alerts to let you know when your card is used and instantly block your card if something seems off. You can save on autopilot, which is my favorite feature, just putting that money away. When you sign up for a Chime spending account, you can enroll in an optional savings account and grow your savings automatically with 0.50% annual percentage yield, which is 10 times the national average. So right now, join the millions on Chime. Sign up takes 2 minutes and doesn't affect your credit score. Apply now at chime.com/mamas. That's chime.com/mamas. Chime is a financial technology company. Banking services provided by the Bancorp Bank or Stride Bank N.A. members FDIC. Eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Overdraft only applies to debit card purchases. Limits start at $20 and may be increased up to $100 by Chime. Early direct deposit depends on the payer. Out-of-network cash withdrawal fees apply. Third-party and cash deposit fees may apply. Go to chime.com/mamas for details.
The repeat thing I'm kind of hearing in your story that you shared that a lot of, I know, people listening can relate to, which isn't always the case. So C-sections save lives. They're definitely there for a reason. We absolutely love that we have that technology and medical providers that can do that. The situations where it really, really sucks is when you don't have a supportive staff around you. And that can make the biggest difference. I've been at births where they've ended up in a C-section and it's because family and providers and people around them are basically telling the mom, you can't do this, when there actually wasn't any evidence-based information to make that decision on. It can be a huge mental block when you don't have supportive people around you. But I've also been at C-section births where the staff was extremely supportive and supporting them every way that they could, and it just wasn't going to happen, and that sucks. And that's what the C-sections are there for. The thing that you're seeing in the United States, though, is that the C-section rate is way higher than it needs to be, because when you go into specific hospitals or cities, you find that it's way lower when they're practicing evidence-based birth. So when you look at things like failure to progress, that's actually a term coined by some guy a long time ago who said that you should progress 1 centimeter every hour. That's basically the standard at which you should dilate, which just isn't the case at all. There's no evidence that suggests that. Research doesn't support that. But a lot of doctors still go off of that information that this guy just came up with. Birth isn't linear. It's completely different for everybody. And I feel like that's kind of where you see the C-section rate going up, is that if it's not kind of this picture perfect situation, that C-sections increase. Do you see that kind of in your community?
Yeah, I totally agree. And, to go back to your point about a supportive provider, finding a supportive provider is, really tough. And it's something that can take a lot of work that, a lot of people don't have the time or the resources to, give to that. And I think that's where we can see kind of a big disparity in, the Vbac rate in the U.S., which is, I believe, around 13%. And then in other countries, like Sweden, for example, I believe the Vbac rate is 55%. So that it's possible. But, it's very, very hard to find a supportive provider. I don't think I mentioned this before, but I'm actually pregnant with my third right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And in my state, I live in New Jersey, and in my state, there are only 2 providers that support Vbac after 2 cesareans. So yeah, it's really, really tough.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. And so I just want to touch on a few risks, because one thing that I have experienced is a lot of scare tactics of them being like, listen, if you try for a VBAC, you have double the risk of your placenta rupturing, which is true, but actually more than double. But when you look at the exact numbers, people deserve to know the exact statistics. So if you have a VBAC, the risk of uterine rupture is 0.47%. So it's still extremely, extremely low. If you have a repeat C-section, it's 0.026%. So they're making it sound like you have like a 50% chance of your uterus rupturing if you have a VBAC, which just is not the case at all. So I've heard that. I've been at births where that's happened, and it's really frustrating instead of a provider just saying, hey, these are the numbers, and if you're a good candidate, you don't have other things against you, why not try? And so looking at provider statistics and rates and hospital rates are very important. But something that a lot of people don't mention with that is repeat C-sections, you develop the risk of placenta accreta. And with placenta accreta, if that does occur, the maternal death rate is 7%. That's huge. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I never hear people talking about that with repeat C-sections.
Yes. And with placenta accreta, the rate of increase in placenta accreta that has happened since the 70s or 80s has been parallel to the rate of cesareans in the U.S. So we know that it's directly related.
Right. And if you look at the maternal death rate, it has increased in the United States. And then you also see that more with the minority communities where VBAC is way less of an option. A lot of women aren't even given a choice in the minority communities or in those hospitals. So when you look at the statistics, they are directly linked. You see it going that way. And so I guess how do you feel we can change those numbers? I feel like, again, people should just have the information and you decide what the risks are and if they're worth taking and what the benefit could be. And not to say everybody should get a VBAC. I'm sure there's a lot of cases where it's safer for that mom to get another cesarean.
Right.
So just kind of having the information presented and the choice given, but where could people kind of push back when they're told like, oh no, you can't have one?
So I think to your point, it just goes back to really being informed and being educated about what your choices are. Which is a big part of ICAN's mission. So our vision really is to see a reduction in the cesarean rate that is driven by birthing people assuming the responsibility for their healthcare by making evidence-based, risk-appropriate childbirth decisions. Mm-hmm. So our ICAN is, just to give you a little background, ICAN is a nonprofit advocacy and support organization And our mission is to improve maternal and child health by reducing preventable cesareans through education, supporting cesarean recovery, and advocating for Vbac. So the advocating for Vbac is only one part of our mission. I think a lot of people kind of, in the birth world see ICAN as like this VBAC organization, but education is a really, really big part of our mission. And ICAN is 100% volunteer-led and operated. So, we are all very, very passionate about this cause and, making sure that people know what their choices are.
We're going to take a quick break from this episode so I can talk to you about BetterHelp. BetterHelp has been a part of my mental health journey and my postpartum recovery as well. It doesn't always have to be physical. There's so much mental that goes into motherhood, into this transition in your lives. And there's no shame in having a counselor to talk through these things with and going to therapy. It can be so healing. I've found motherhood to be a very healing time in my life, kind of reflecting on the things that I need to work on and change. And so it's been really great using BetterHelp to be able to have that confidential resource that I can work through these things with. And it's not just for postpartum and motherhood. I mean, any area of your life that you're going through and you need a little help, whether you're depressed or have anxiety, dealing with family issues, relationship issues, sleeping trauma, you can find so many different professionals in these different areas to work with. They're always confidential. It's convenient. It's professional. It's affordable. And you don't have to wait in some awkward office waiting to see your therapist. And in fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. So start living a happier life today. And as a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/mamas. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mamas.
So like we were saying before, the C-section rate in the United States is around 33%. In 1970, it was 5.8%. So really, it has skyrocketed in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And the World Health Organization states that the cesarean rate should be around 10 to 15%. So this really is a public health concern. And unfortunately, as we were talking about before, I think that a lot of people feel very coerced into having a cesarean when it might not be necessary. So, when a cesarean is necessary, it can be a life-saving technique, and it can be worth the risks involved. So while ICAN believes that cesareans do save lives when used appropriately, we recognize that the increase in the number of cesareans has not resulted in an increase of healthy moms and babies.
Right.
So this is an overuse of cesareans, and that's jeopardizing lives. And as you were talking about before, the maternal mortality rate in the U.S., it's the highest among developed nations, and with Black mothers being 3 times more likely to die from childbirth-related complications than white women. So again, this is really a huge social justice issue. So ICAN has created Cesarean Awareness Month, as you were mentioning in the beginning. So during the month of April is our campaign for Cesarean Awareness Month, where we focus on really all topics surrounding cesareans. So including reducing the preventable cesarean rate, supporting cesarean recovery, and then advocating for Vbac and educating. So we need this awareness because researchers estimate that almost half of the C-sections performed in the U.S. are done in situations when babies could be safely delivered vaginally instead, which is really crazy when you think about it. So preventable C-sections may be responsible for up to 20,000 major surgical complications a year. So as we were talking about before, there are risks. I mean, there's risks and benefits to everything. There's risks and benefits to a C-section. There's risks and benefits to a VBAC. But again, lowering the rate of preventable cesareans is vital to improving maternal child health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're saying like over half of the C-sections in the United States are preventable, which if we're at 33%, that takes us down to like 16.5%, which is way closer to that World Health Organization number where it says that you should be at. So
right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. So ICAN really is a grassroots organization. What we do is encourage evidence-based birth practices and educate people about their choices in birth. So we share evidence-based information and we offer support and information to people across the world through social media, through conferences, webinars, through email, and through our local chapters. So we have local chapters all over the world, many in the U.S., and that's really the heart of our organization. So these chapters host free support meetings for parents. And you don't have to have had a cesarean to join, really anybody can. But this is really where people go for support. We're peer-to-peer support organizations. So the local chapters are really our boots on the ground and doing the work day in and day out. And these chapter leaders are people who are very passionate about this cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you brought up, so kind of educating on evidence-based birth. And for the listeners, I just want to note, because I make reference to it a lot too, I'm obsessed with the Evidence-Based Birth podcast and the work of Rebecca Decker. She has a PhD. She's created this amazing online resource and podcast that literally just takes studies and research and puts out facts. And she has one on Vbacs. It's her episode 113 for people listening. And she actually references ICAN in there. And it's literally statistics and facts on all sorts of things, whether it's failure to progress, inducing labor, VBACs, even random things like eating dates before labor. Does that really help? Does drinking tea really help? And she has a huge research team that looks at all the studies done. They'll find errors in the studies and say whether things are credible or not, and it's just facts and statistics. So a lot of the numbers that we're talking about today, it's based on research that has been thoroughly investigated and that there's evidence to back it up. So when we talk about evidence-based birth, it's when you look at the numbers, when you look at birth, when you look at the outcomes, the statistics, the research that's been done, what can you say? And it's just kind of a fact that most people don't practice evidence-based birth. And they say that once a trial of research has been done, it takes about 20 years to be implemented in practice by doctors and providers. So finding somebody who is going to practice evidence-based birth is a lot harder than it sounds.
Yes, it is. I know firsthand that it is.
Yeah, I'm interested too, like in your experience in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know offhand what their C-section rate is like there?
It's very high. It's almost 40%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Which is really kind of surprising. But it's very much, my experience there was interesting. I tried to hire a doula, and there was only one doula in my city that spoke English. And I lived in the fourth largest city in the country. So doulas there are not really like a thing yet. I'm hoping that they, will gain some traction. I did contact her, and she happened to be pregnant and due around the same time as I was. So she wasn't able to support me. I kind of wonder, what would have happened. I guess that's always the question after birth. Like, what would have happened if X, Y, and Z? But what I was going to say was that the culture in Poland is very much like a respect your elders type of culture. So doctors are considered an authority figure. And if you question a doctor, it is considered very disrespectful. So, my experience there was very interesting because as an American, I know that I can refuse treatment, and it's not really that way there. My husband literally had an argument with a doctor who wanted for me to go straight to a C-section. And my husband speaks Polish, so he was advocating for me. And I mean, really had like a heated argument with this doctor to try and let me labor a little bit longer. So, it was, very, very interesting to say the least. And I think it was a humbling experience. And I learned a lot about myself and motherhood is just so transformative. So yeah, it's definitely shaped who I am today for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, the doula aspect too, studies and research shows that when you have a doula present, C-sections decrease by 28%. And that's a huge number. That's, a third of them, but only 4 to 6% of people use doulas in the United States. I really believe that if it wasn't an out-of-pocket expense, doulas can be super expensive depending on where you live. If more insurance covered doulas, if they recognize the benefit of doulas, of having one present, and how it decreases C-sections and other interventions, that they would cover them and then more people would use them. I always tell people to look at Doula Match. That's a great place to find an affordable doula. A lot of times it's doulas just starting out. But I think the reason why doulas decrease C-sections, it's not because we're there to yell at your doctor at all, because I tread lightly on the word advocating. I really don't think doulas advocate for you, but they empower you to do so for yourself and help that educational and informational piece. So when it comes to making a birth plan, it requires looking into, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, I didn't know that this was an option. I didn't know I could ask this question. I didn't know that I could have these different options available to me. And when you know those things, other interventions are less likely to happen. And like you said, I mean, in Poland, there's this respecting your elders, but I find that here, people are like, well, you're the doctor, you just know, I'm just going to go with it. And although obviously your doctor's going to know a lot more than you do about birth, doctors know way more than I do. I'm not a medical provider. But when you look at the research and statistics, they prove something. They tell a story, and you are the only person who lives in your body 24/7. So you have an intuition, you have a say in how your birth goes. So advocating for yourself is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, if you don't know that something is an option, then how do you choose that? You can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something that doulas it's just great to have a doula because they really can educate you on options that you may not have known were there.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're trying to take away more options though, like delivering frank breech babies. Most providers won't do that anymore. And studies have shown that they're actually pretty safe delivery when the baby's butt first. Now, a footling breech when the baby's foot first, that's actually very scary, and a lot worse things can happen. And the safest bet there is to have a C-section. But you can find hardly any providers that will deliver a frank breech baby. It's an art that used to be taught to doctors, and they're not teaching it anymore. Yes. So just options are also being taken away.
Yes. Yeah, that's very, very true about breech birth. And I think it's unfortunate that options are just so limited now. And that's really goes back to, as you were saying, in medical schools nowadays, they just don't teach it anymore. Another option that I think a lot of families don't know is an option if you're going for a repeat cesarean, or if you need to have a scheduled cesarean for whatever reason, whether it's footling breech or placenta previa or whatever, or even if it's an unscheduled cesarean, is having a family-centered or gentle cesarean, which is an option that ICAN does like to educate people about. So I actually had a family-centered cesarean with my second. So basically the overall purpose is invoking a peaceful, calm atmosphere that closely mimics what happens during and immediately after a vaginal childbirth. So many of the options are possible in even an unscheduled cesarean. So that means, having a clear drape so you can kind of see when they pull your baby out. That's what happened to me, and it was really cool. And my doula was there, and she was able to take pictures of my son being born. So yeah, having an extra support person is also an option. So your partner and a doula or a birth photographer, having understrained arms, immediate skin to skin if mom and baby are stable, music of your choice that can play in the OR, immediate breastfeeding if able, and having your baby stay with you in the operating room and in recovery. And these are just some of the options. Excuse me, but this goes back to, again, really just knowing what your options are. So you need to talk to your healthcare provider. You need to have a birth plan. You don't need to, but you should have a birth plan, have it fit on one page, and have it say, if I am going to have a cesarean, this is what I would like to happen. And then again, hiring a doula is kind of a huge, huge part of that.
I always encourage the one-page birth plan. It's really hard for people to flip through pages and paragraphs of stuff. So if you just have this is during labor, during birth, in case of this, in case of that, And I know on mine, it was in case of C-section. And there was just like 4 bullet points there of things I wanted in case of a C-section. So keeping it super simple and to the point, and having those to bring to your birth and pass around. And if you can't have a doula, having your partner educated to advocate for you, because when you're in labor, it is emotional, it is physical, it's mental, it's everything. And sometimes it's hard to try to make decisions or even to advocate for yourself if you're exhausted, if you're worn out, if you're, kind of feeling defeated or whatever it is. So having your partner be a voice of reason, advocating, talking to the staff on your behalf, asking the doctor, what are the benefits of doing this? What are the risks of doing it? What are our alternatives? What happens if we give it more time? Just kind of all of those basic questions to see if there are other options available to you. And again, like we all know people, I know people who C-sections have saved their lives. Like this isn't a don't get a C-section podcast at all. Again, we're grateful for them. And they've come a long ways. I mean, I was reading how when C-section started, like in the 15 or 1600s, it was an 80% death rate for C-sections when they started. So we've come a very long way from when C-sections started to now. Thank God that's not the case. But again, it's just to educate you, to know your options. And and there's other things too. I know like eating and drinking during labor, a lot of places don't let you do that. And there's no research really that suggests that, because they think that if you end up in a C-section or that you have to be put under, basically the only reason is you could throw up and like gag and die like on your own puke, basically.
Right. Aspirate.
You can like I can't think of the word for it. It's like asphyxiation. Mm-hmm. And that studies show that that's like so extremely rare. And now you have somebody with you, watching you. If you threw up, you'd be fine. So there's just like a lot of weird practices still in place that really make no sense at all. So I was puking profusely throughout my labor for hours, and it was horrible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I was also eating and drinking, so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you have to know your rights, which can be really hard for some people. And I feel like we touched on this before, but a lot of people, go into birth thinking, well, my doctor is the expert and, knows what's best. And really, you know what's best for you and for your baby. So you have the right to informed decision-making, informed consent, and informed refusal, which means that you were given an unbiased discussion on all of the benefits, risks, and alternatives of the proposed treatment and procedure. And you either freely chose to consent or to refuse.
A lot of places don't allow that, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I've talked to people where it's like, basically, well, they can, I don't know. I guess that's hard to say. I was just having a conversation with somebody today who was refusing a treatment, and they said that they would no longer be allowed at that practice. So I guess practices can kick people out before, but it's illegal to refuse somebody in labor. Mm-hmm. So I guess once you're in labor, it's not like they can refuse to deliver your baby or work with you. I'm actually not sure how.
I'm not really the expert on advocacy either, but I do know that you can probably take some sort of legal action if that does happen. I believe that they're not supposed to refuse treatment,
right?
But
Right. Or can't force it without your consent.
Right. But
I mean, that does happen. But again, that's also a lot more in minority communities. And that's something to look at too. I mean, no matter what kind of birth you're planning, look at your hospital statistics, look at reviews. I'm fortunate enough to work at a hospital where the nursing staff is amazing. And like good nurses can make the biggest difference in your birth. Having a supportive staff can make the biggest difference. So even but I mean, everywhere you go, you might have somebody who you don't mesh with. So if you're in labor and you're not really meshing with the staff that's there, you can ask for a new nurse. You can ask for other people to be there. So that's another situation. And honestly, with most of the births I've been to, I've had one or two nurses that I'm like, oh, this person's really tough to work with. They're usually really supportive and want to help you. So, but again, that's another option. If you don't have people that you're feeling are supportive to what you're doing, then ask for somebody else.
Yeah. Switching providers is a very common question that we get asked at ICAN because, again, this kind of goes back to finding a Vbac supportive provider. And a lot of people feel that, they want to switch when they find out that their provider either doesn't support Vbac or is what we call Vbac tolerant, which means that they're like, yeah, you can have a Vbac, and then you creep up on 40 weeks and they're like, oh, well, we got to schedule that C-section. You're like, wait, what? Or, they tell you that they refuse to induce Vbacs, or they tell you, when you get into your third trimester, well, your baby's looking kind of big. So, maybe we should keep that C-section available as an option, So that's a provider that's a Vbac tolerant. Like they're telling you can, but they're not really supportive. Right. So yeah, switching providers is very possible. And you have the right to do that, and you can do that up until the day of delivery if you want. So that's just definitely a question that we get asked a lot at ICAN. I personally switched providers with my second pregnancy, and I was 28 weeks. So I was in my third trimester, and that's just what I felt comfortable doing. So it can be a little scary and intimidating, and you might feel bad. Like I felt a little guilty, when the other office, like the previous office, called me and they were like, oh, we heard you're switching. What happened? And, and you have to have that conversation with them, if you're comfortable. But, it is something that is possible to do, and you 100% have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you'd mentioned big babies. I suggest everyone look up the evidence on big babies too. Mm-hmm. That's just another reason that C-sections happen, and their research just really isn't there to really support that. When they tell you have a big baby, they're wrong over 50% of the time. And so it's hard. And then it gets in your head, and then you're more likely to have a C-section. It just causes like a ripple effect. So I would just not find out the size of your baby for the most part, because women who don't find out the size and their provider says nothing birth 10-pound babies, no problem. And there's a lot of stories and research and evidence on that as well. So I'd love to touch on two things that help VBACs happen, and a few points that can aid in having a VBAC is if you had a vaginal birth before and then a C-section, you're having a VBAC is extremely likely. Mm-hmm. Spontaneous labor helps protect VBACs. So not getting induced or scheduling anything, but letting your body kind of go into labor spontaneously helps VBAC success. And then spacing out pregnancies. If you can space them out at least 6 months, they've shown that that helps support VBAC success, but that doesn't, I heard this crazy statistic that almost half of the babies in the United States are unplanned. So that doesn't happen a lot, planning when you're getting pregnant. So, but if you can space it out 6 months, that helps your chances of success.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, none of these things are like requirements. Like there are VBACs that are induced. Like you can have an induction and have a VBAC. But yes, those definitely are things that would help you towards the goal of having a VBAC. I think one of the most important things is really finding a VBAC supportive provider that you're comfortable with, and that again can be kind of hard, but it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that the practice that I work with is a 17% rate. So that's much lower than the U.S. standard. But I also used to practice in Las Vegas. When I was there, had a 40% C-section rate. So, I mean, doing your research is definitely super important.
Wow. Yeah, and some hospitals actually have what is called VBAC bans. Mm-hmm. So like they basically say you can't have a VBAC here. They ban you from laboring after having one cesarean or multiple cesareans, which basically equates to a mandated surgery. Mm-hmm. So that's not ethical. And, these VBAC bans are, all over the United States, and they can make it really hard to have a VBAC. It's not impossible to have a VBAC. And it doesn't mean that a repeat cesarean is required. But again, this goes back to, knowing your rights and having informed consent. And that includes the right to accept or decline procedures. So if your hospital has a VBAC ban, you can go to the complaint system, might be like a good place to start. But this is, a really big problem in the birth world.
Mm-hmm. What were the other things that I can't do? Because you're saying like the VBAC part is just a part of it. What were the other parts?
So we have a 3-part mission. So it's reduce preventable cesareans through education, supporting cesarean recovery, and advocating for VBAC. So the education and supporting cesarean recovery piece is a lot of that work is done through our local chapters. So our local chapters host free meetings, support meetings for parents. Right now, a lot of them are on Zoom. So, even if you don't have a local chapter near you, you can join a meeting. And these are really great places for people to go to, understand what their options are, and to just share your experience with other people who get it. I think a lot of times having a cesarean or an unexpected cesarean can be very traumatic. It's not always traumatic. Some people, have great experiences having a cesarean. But, sometimes it is a traumatic birth, and having a safe space to go where you can talk about your birth is really, really important in that process of healing and processing your birth. So that's really where our local chapters are great for, because you can go and have a safe space to share your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like with cesarean recovery, there's not I mean, there definitely are resources and stuff out there, but it's major abdominal surgery, and people expect it's like, oh, well, you had a baby, and it's just nuts to me how we would treat any other major surgery. If somebody that, had a major surgery done, you would not expect tons from them like we do from moms who are having major abdominal surgery. And a lot of them are recovering from labor and abdominal surgery.
Yes.
Just because you had a belly birth, you're still bleeding. You still have to deal with the yucky parts of it as well. So I wish that there was I don't know. I was talking to somebody who gave birth overseas, and they had midwives that came and checked in weekly with them for weeks. And I'm like, what? How come we don't have this in the United States? And just for women who end up having C-sections, just that there would be additional support, especially when there's no paternal leave. So partners have to go back to work. Sometimes you're there by yourself with another kid at home, and you just had major surgery. You have to take care of yourself in order for your body to recover. But most people aren't allowed to fully do that.
Yeah. I actually had that experience when I was in Poland. I had my my midwife, who was supposed to be my home birth midwife. She came for me, and she came once a week for, I think it was the first 6 weeks. And she would check on me and the baby. And it was great. I mean, it was wonderful to have her support, and it wasn't a quick visit either. She would come and she would weigh the baby, and she would, make sure that he was okay. And then she would look at my incision, and it just so happened that I did actually have a topical infection on my incision. And she also had to, remove some suture from, I think they were the dissolving ones, but she had to kind of remove the end piece. And she just did that in my home, which was great. So yeah, having that support, I think, was essential. And especially because I was having a lot of feeding problems, with my son. He had a really bad tongue and lip tie, and that went undiagnosed for a long time. But really just having her support was really great and helped me a lot, I think, especially as a new mom. I mean, I was so overwhelmed. And then here, you're right. They're just like, here's your newborn baby. You go home, and it's 6 weeks until you have your first visit. And it's a long time. And especially when you're recovering from a major surgery, it's really tough. And there are a lot of questions that come up of is this normal? Should this still be hurting? And yeah, so having that support, I think is really important, because recovering from a cesarean is totally different than recovering from a vaginal birth.
Mm-hmm. I know. I can't imagine having a cesarean it's hardcore. And that's also why whenever people think having a C-section is an easy way out or anything like that, it's no, that is you being completely cut open in order to bring life into this world. It is very hard. It's hard to recover. And it's a valid form of birth that is a very tough way to bring a baby into this world.
It is. It definitely is. And again, it can be, a very traumatic experience for some people. Not everybody, but, birth trauma is a real thing that people go through. And I think one of the hardest things to go through while processing a traumatic birth is someone minimizing your experience. Mm-hmm. A lot of people tend to use the phrase, a healthy baby is all that matters. And And I think people just don't realize how harmful dismissive comments like that can be. I personally experienced that after my first birth, where I was just floored at what happened to me, and it was the last thing that I expected. And I was also the first out of my group of friends to have a baby. So I felt very alone. And I had numerous people say to me, well, your baby is healthy. You're fine. You're good. And, when someone gives birth, a healthy baby is, of course, the most important thing, but it's not all that matters. So when you tell someone that a healthy baby is all that matters, you're silencing them, and you're saying that their feelings don't matter, even though they felt like they had a traumatic experience or an experience where they felt, hurt or even violated in some aspects. And they just shouldn't complain because they have a healthy baby. And this behavior is really harmful. And I think it really perpetuates a culture where mothers are afraid to seek help for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And it's just not okay. It's not okay to tell someone that you're fine after their traumatic birth, because they're not fine. They're not fine, So ICAN believes that a healthy birth incorporates emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And that's so good. I love that definition. It's a reminder that just as moms, we just need to get better at supporting each other, at asking each other better questions that aren't just focused on baby, and giving each other space to process and have all those feelings. We all have some struggle, right? Whether it's with our birth or with feeding or with sleeping. Nobody's just crushing it from the beginning and dominating all these areas. And so just asking each other better questions and giving each other space and acknowledge and validating your experience could be so transformative and powerful in the motherhood community. Mm-hmm. I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for bringing awareness. Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about ICAN at?
So there's numerous ways to get involved with ICAN. We are always looking for people to get involved. So one way is that you can become a member. A 1-year membership during the month of April for Cesarean Awareness Month is $25. It's normally $30, so it's discounted a little bit during the month of April, which is nice. We also have 5-year, 10-year, and lifetime membership options, or you can make a one-time or a recurring donation. Something that ICAN has as well that a lot of people don't know about is a professional membership. So if you're a birth professional and you would like to have your business listed on ICAN's directory, you can consider becoming a professional member of ICAN. And then volunteering. We're always looking for new volunteers to join our cause. So you can either join a local chapter or you can start a local chapter if you don't have one near you. Or if you don't want to start a chapter, we have a ton of executive positions that are open, and we're always looking for people to help join us in our mission. So you can go to our website. It is ican-online.org. And that's where all this information can be found on memberships and professional memberships and volunteer positions. And then in terms of Cesarean Awareness Month, during the month of April, we're going to be sharing on our social channels. So we're on Facebook and Instagram. And we're going to be sharing facts about cesareans, and you can go to our website. You can actually download social media graphics that you can share to your own channels to just kind of spread the word. And I think that's it. Our Facebook is facebook.com/ICANonline, and our Instagram is at ICANBirth.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your story and your experience. And for the listeners, I will leave all that, how to connect, in the show notes. Thank you so much, Tatiana, for coming on today.
Thank you.
All right. I hope that you enjoyed that interview, that you got some out of it. Don't forget to check out the resources that we have linked to find out more about Vbacs, the evidence-based birth resource is an amazing one to check out. And yeah, just to know your rights in birthing, to know all the statistics, the facts going into it, and empowering and educating yourself. And that's what we're here to do. Next week, we have on Dr. Tracy Tran, and she is going to be talking to us, educating us all about tongue and lip ties. She is a pediatric dentist, and so she deals with these all the time, and she's going to talk about just kind of some of the more scientific information behind it and what to look out for when you need revisions, what can happen if you don't have it revised, because not all of them do need revisions, but some of them do. So she kind of dives into all of the details with us, and it's obviously something that I really want to talk about since Jovi had a tongue and a lip tie, and since I shared that, so many people reached out saying that they dealt with the same. So I was super excited to interview her and just learn more, because it can go into like so many different aspects of your life it can play into. And I feel like we talked for an hour and there was still so much more I wanted to dive into. So maybe we'll finish that conversation on another episode. So make sure that you stay tuned till next week. And don't forget, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, it was awesome with Samantha Bush talking about her infertility journey, about loss, miscarriage, and everything that she's been through. So such a powerful story, and she's such an incredible woman. So make sure you go back and listen to that. All right. I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you had a good Easter this last weekend, if you celebrate that, and that you are just heading into April. Springtime kind of brings new beginnings and hope. So I hope that you are seeing some of that in your life this year. All right. Love you guys. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies, and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.